Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to each of you to Collegeville Connections, a new series of online events presented by the Collegeville Institute, located on the campus of St. John's University in Abbey in Collegeville, Minnesota. Collegeville Connections highlights the work of Collegeville Institute alums and friends from across the spectrum of the Collegeville Institute's programs. It provides an opportunity for new guests, program alums, and friends to stay connected to each other and to the Collegeville Institute. Most importantly, you'll learn a lot from our remarkable guests. Or today, you may learn, but you'll also be entertained and enlightened, hopefully. I'm Susan Sink, a communications associate and the poetry editor of Bearings Online. Just before we start, I want to make a few technical housekeeping announcements. So we will have the chat function going, but please don't use the chat. What we would like you to do is if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box. I'll be looking at the questions as they come in, and so will Carla Durand, who is running tech for us today. So if you're having any issues or you have any questions of any kind, please put them in Q&A. Also, you can put questions for our guests. We hope to have a little time at the end for question and answer. Also, we're taping this on Facebook Live. So if you should lose your connection, you can go to our Facebook page and watch there. Also, it will be available on Facebook pretty much 30 minutes, an hour after the event, and you can go watch it later or share it with people who may have missed it. I think that's probably it. So let me begin with an introduction. Today, we're celebrating National Poetry Month with a reading by 3 Collegeville Institute poets. Our 3 award-winning poets are Betsy Johnson, Shan Ray, and Angela Alimo O'Donnell. They'll each read from recent collections. All 3 are alumni of our summer writing programs and contributors to our digital magazine, Bearings Online. In these times, it's exciting to be able to bring them together despite 3 separate time zones from the East Coast, Midwest, and West Coast. Also, all 3 have new books out, either in 2020 or 2021. I'll introduce each poet before she or he reads and keep it brief to make as much space as possible for the poems. Our first reader is Betsy Johnson. She is my friend and neighbor, not just a Collegeville Institute poet, but also a St. Joseph, Minnesota poet. She has published 3 books of poetry, most recently, When Animals Are Animals, just released from May Apple Press in February 2021. Her work has appeared in Commonweal, the Iowa Review, Prairie Schooner, Alaska Quarterly Review, and elsewhere. She teaches in the English and Communications departments at the College of St. Benedict, St. John's University, and is a gifted yoga instructor whose practices and meditations are available to all through her yoga website. And I know this from experience that she's a gifted yoga teacher, willowyogaminnesota.com. And I'll put that in the chat to share with you. So thank you, Betsy, for joining us and looking forward to hearing your new work.
Thank you so much. And it is a pleasure and an honor to be here. So my thanks to Susan and everyone at the Collegeville Institute. And it's an honor to be reading with my 2 esteemed guests today. So as Susan said, my book is When Animals Are Animals. And while these poems were written over a number of years, many of them were written in 2016 when the world sort of seemed to do its thing. And so the beginning of the book really kind of struggles with the state of our country, with what we were going through. And we've all been through some hard times, so I don't want to spend too much time there. But a long time ago, I heard a New Yorker poetry editor talking about edit toward joy. And so we need to honor the struggle, but in this book, I really do try and edit toward joy and hope where I can find it. But I want to give you a sense of some of the early poems, and some of these things still ring true today. So I'll begin with a poem called Tar Days. The dog's ball never rolls under the couch. We fall, we don't break. This is not a myth. It will not work, undressing, bearing arms, daring branches. Stuck, only our eyes can follow. The dove a man shoots with his index finger, but only because his gun is in his truck. And the second poem is where the title of the book comes from. And I used to have chickens, and I always thought pecking order was just something, I don't know, not real, but it is definitely real. And so this deals with that idea, and it's called This Feels Prophetic. In my story, there's a dead chicken in the garbage can. The others pecked the beloved to death. Blood spatter on top of my coop. My friend's story is set in Paris. She was 7 and watching pigeons at the Eiffel Tower. The thin one had a hole in its neck from the others. Every seed it ate popped out of the hole. I hate it when animals are animals. And the next poem is called Prairie Town Petroglyphs. I grew up in the southwest corner of Minnesota, and about 10 miles away from my hometown were the Jeffers petroglyphs, where Native Americans carved into this low red rock. And they've uncovered a bunch more petroglyphs, and by now I think there are over 3,000 different images in these rocks. So it's called Prairie Town Petroglyphs, and I visited them after a funeral when I went back home. The woman who lived next door to me as a child is settling in to her new place in the dirt. Her eyes made me drive all this way to say goodbye. I do not go straight home. I take a right. I am the only one to brave today's tempest on the prairie. The wind pushes at my back the way my father used to when we entered a room together. The same weeds that brushed the lurching schooners reach for my legs as I approach the long red rock. Carved with arrows, atlatls, and thunderbirds, the rope doesn't stop me. I get down on my knees and touch the lucky buffalo. The arrow aimed at her heart will never pierce her stone hide. And the next poem is called The Lord of the Rings in Our Current State. In the chapter on the long shadow, tangle and snare, thirst and oily water hitting the empty belly. Who's there to snatch a body away from the edge, to catch a body about to fall? Salvation is possible, but between here and there, wings blotting out light. Friends fighting their own things, pouring from a spiked gate. Why not cut the brain in half? Tomorrow morning, tired legs, and look here, a mountain. Tender skin meet world of gravel. Weary spirit, take up your empty rucksack. And now we make that shift to the poems that really try to find the hope where we can find that. Plea, unbidden. That's how one approaches an oracle. Forest, heart, ash. My feet paddle along the rough dirt path. Hear me, O eternal green. Lead me to a rock spout, water enough to wash the desert out. Antidote. Do not live this year as a snake, unhinged, paying attention only to rats. Instead, cowl yourself with scarf and walk in snowlight. From the drifted beach, that custodian of temporary miracles, step onto the water, courageous in your coat of many feathers. And this next one is a poem. It happened at a potluck, as I say in the poem, but it's one of those scenes I will never, ever forget. So it was this potluck, and there were kids everywhere, and there was a toddler walking around with a freshly sharpened pencil. And I was watching this, but then I was watching an older woman watching this toddler, and she just was poised because of the potential of that situation. So this is called Be Like. Be like the old woman at the potluck who eyes the toddler walking around with a freshly sharpened pencil while the father of 6 talks on. Sit like a winged thing on eggs slightly bigger than a brown eye. Guard any blossoming as faithfully as a thorn. And just 3 more. So this first one I'm going to read through, it also comes back to chickens, and then I'll kind of contextualize the poem. But the poem is called When I Finally Get My Chance. When I finally get my chance, I curse. A cold wind fills the night. They're just chickens after all, in a tizzy. The one with the bad leg walks in circles, now softly squawking. Others huddle on a low branch under the streetlight. The small door on the coop is open. There are no chickens inside. The face that greets me is wreathed in white feathers, lore, and talons. What do I do when I come face to face with wisdom? I kneel with the mundane lacrosse racket. My offering is satisfactory. The snowy owl claims the perch, the night, moon, snow, wing. So this is a true happening. The chickens were going crazy one night, and so I went out into the chicken yard, and they were all over squawking, and I looked in the coop and came face to face with this snowy owl on their perch, just looking at me. And in the poem, you know, I go and grab a lacrosse racket, but I need to say that my very first reaction was to scream like a little girl. So I screamed. And you ever have those moments where you wish you could go back in time? And if I did, I wish I would have just sat down and stared and been in the presence of that creature for as long as it would have let me. But instead, I ran to get this lacrosse racket, and I put the lacrosse racket in, and the owl was like, okay, and just stepped up on it. And it was really heavy as I pulled it back out. And then you often hear that owls make no sound when they fly. And indeed, it just took off. And it was one of those moments that I will never, ever forget. So yeah, it was pretty incredible. All right, so 2 more poems. Joy Linger. I tulip, I cup one hand, come sun, rain be. I honeysuckle, I soldier crawl through the dark. I cow, I turn sweet grass. I goat, I turn trash into milk. I moon, I pilgrim, I circus of pelicans. I feather, I weeble, covey of quail. I rabbit, I perfect worry. I palomino, I face old fence. I thistle, no, I crane. I stand, I quiet, I feed. And then the last poem in the book is Consider the Cocklebur. Consider the cocklebur that will not let go until you drag it to fertile ground. Carry the burr here, there, carry it like a horse, a pest that rubs, a sore that weeps, because the wide world needs you. Do not drop and die in a puddle of petals. Hold on. Cling to bodies so tenacious in your drive to sow life that you annoy everyone you meet. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. That was wonderful. I also have chickens here in St. Joseph, and so I could identify. We also have an owl story, but it was more tragic than yours. It arrived already caught in a trap that it had stepped in. So nature in the Midwest. I also appreciate those poems for the mixture of grief and hope and joy that I think is in the air right now. Our second reader is Shan Ray. Shan Ray spent part of his childhood on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Southeast Montana, played professional basketball in Germany, and has served as a scholar of leadership and forgiveness studies in Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas. He has been granted fellowships from the NEA and Breadloaf Writers Conference and won the High Plains Book Award. Shan is the author of 7 books, most recently in 2020, Atomic Theory 7, Poems to My Wife and God, a project in collaboration with the painter Trinh Mai that received an American Book Award. I do think one of these deconstructed sonnet sequences of 7 14-line poems is the longest poem that we've published in Bearings Online. It was an easy decision to accept it, and I tried to figure out which one of these sonnets I could take, but it had to be the whole thing. So his work has been featured in Poetry, Esquire, McSweeney's, the American Journal of Poetry, Prairie Schooner Salon, and elsewhere. Shan lives in Spokane, Washington, and teaches at Gonzaga University, the current home of Minnesota basketball player Jalen Suggs, whose half-court shot at the buzzer we will be watching for the next decade. I mostly mention that because since he's a basketball player as well. I have yet to meet Shan in person, as he's attended our Whidbey Island workshops, which happened in the fall, but we've had wonderful correspondence about poetry and life. Welcome, Shan, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Susan, and thanks for your generosity and grace, and for lending us Jalen Suggs for his graceful half-court shot that I was there 10 feet in front of when he jumped up on the table. So it was amazing. Yeah, one of the first, COVID events that people could attend. So basketball's been a big part of my life for sure, and I'll have at least one basketball poem in here. And thank you, Betsy, those physical, stunning, visceral, fierce poems. Thank you. And Angela, great to see you again, and looking forward to your poems. And I've been just touched and moved by the way you approach Flannery O'Connor in your last book. And thank you for giving us those poems. And so I'll start with one from our current poet laureate, Joy Harjo, from my favorite of her many great books, She Had Some Horses. So I'm going to start with one of hers. And she's Muskogee Creek and has done so much to unify and bring light and hope to the nation. And I think part of it is she's unafraid to walk into the shadow and bring healing. And here's one from her called She Had Some Horses. She had some horses who were bodies of sand. She had some horses who were maps drawn of blood. She had horses who were skins of ocean water. She had horses who were the blue air of sky. She had horses who were fur and teeth. She had horses who were clay and would break. She had horses who were splintered red cliff. She had some horses. She had horses with eyes of trains. She had horses with full brown thighs. She had horses who laughed too much. She had horses who threw rocks at glass houses. She had horses who licked razor blades. She had some horses. She had horses who danced in their mother's arms. She had horses who thought they were the sun and their bodies shone and burned like stars. She had horses who waltzed nightly on the moon. She had horses who were much too shy and kept quiet in stalls of their own making. She had some horses. She had horses who liked creek stomp dance songs. She had horses who cried in their beer. She had horses who spit at male queens who made them afraid of themselves. She had horses who said they weren't afraid. She had horses who lied. She had horses who told the truth, who were stripped bare of their tongues. She had some horses. She had horses who called themselves horse. She had horses who called themselves spirit and kept their voices secret and to themselves. She had horses who had no names. She had horses who had books of names. She had some horses. She had horses who whispered in the dark, who were afraid to speak. She had horses who screamed out of fear of the silence, who carried knives to protect themselves from ghosts. She had horses who waited for destruction. She had horses who waited for resurrection. She had some horses. She had horses who got down on their knees for any savior. She had horses who thought their high price had saved them. She had horses who tried to save her, who climbed in her bed at night and prayed. She had some horses. She had some horses she loved. She had some horses she hated. These were the same horses. So from Joy Harjo, and I hope you can enjoy some of her work along the way too. So many of the Native American nations currently are leading us as a nation, as an American nation, into greater reconciliation. And I think as we look back at much of our own history, we notice that there's been a genocidal tendency and ultimate violence throughout history and throughout all of our various nations and tribes and ways of being. And so it's something uncommon, something part of the deep mystery, something divine when others can lead us into reconciliation. And so one of those comes from the Northern Cheyenne, where the reservation where I grew up in Montana, southeast Montana. Another comes from the Nez Perce, and the Nez Perce suffered the Big Hole Massacre. And just to give people an example, currently the descendants of those who were massacred at the Big Hole in Montana meet with the descendants of those who committed the massacre and walk through the dawn carrying these lanterns, and then they meet together in a circle of reconciliation. And that happens yearly in Montana. So it's always good to sort of see some of these ways of being that others are leading us into. And that brings me down into the family, because I think of the family as, and our various types of families as the source, part of the source of where both love and hope reside, and also where devastation can happen. Here's a poem that just sort of came about when I was coming home one day, and I'll just go into it. So it's called Hesperus, after the evening star, or Venus. And so this is for Natalia, my daughter, who's now 25, but this was when she was 4 years old. My 4-year-old daughter handed me a card, "To Daddy" written on the front, and inside a rough field of 5-pointed lights. And the words, "You're my favorite daddy in the stars." So the story behind that, there's more to the poem, but I come into the house, she's on the floor in the kitchen, and she's scribbling out this card, right? And it's just with crayons. So there's all these kind of gold stars inside it, and it has these words in it. "You're my favorite daddy in the stars." The poem goes on. "In this western night, we light the sky like Vega, Deneb, Altair, Alberio, the summer triangle, Cygnus the swan. Our hair tangled with wood and gravel, our eyes like vacant docks that beckon every boat." "Tell me about the word stars," I said. "Oh," she said, "sorry, I didn't know how to spell world." So I always love that one from Natalia. And this one is after, let me find it here. This one is after, if you're familiar, I'm working at Jesuit University, and all kinds of unique relationships have come out of that over the 25 years that I've been here. And so one of those unique relationships is with Ignatius' first principle and foundation. So this poem came out of the first principle and foundation, which is part of a theological understanding of closeness between people and each other, and between people and creation, between people and God. So here's this poem. Poem after the first principle and foundation. Certain discoveries contain unforeseen subatomic fusion, like the resurrection bloom of light on my wife's face this morning. A daughter, a light in my big man's hand, a newborn head at rest on my fingertips. Her back and the tiny curved rise of her ribcage fitted neatly into my palm. Her feet curled below my wrist, my hands under her. And later her form at rest on my chest. Oh, speak love in me forever, Lord. For while this daughter sleeps, her closed eyelids, her 5 pound and some ounces body, the rise and fall of her body contains galaxies. And the alpine sun over 3 oceans plateau in the Beartooth Range, over the southern Montana border, and the ways my progenitors, German, Czech, forewent their kin and ushered the deadly brother over the threshold into the eternal fission that can only be healed by the feminine soul of Christ in everyday women and men, insubstantial and also intimate, with starfields and cisterns of breath poured out at Ladice. My 82 children, each one, the one that was lost, found by our true sister, Marie Yukatilova Kuchova, and our good brother, her husband, where the incarnate tilt of flowers reminds us, lean in, don't cower. You found them again, God, and slipped them through the window of heaven, singing, oh, sing love in us again. God, give us the gift of this one, alive, asleep on my chest, bearing wounds too large to bear. Oh, breathe in us, breathe life, let us forsake death. This one, your Alexis, which in the ancient tongue means defender of mankind. O Sacred Heart, now wounded, hear the Queen. Speak your name listening, oh, let us sleep in love with you, fearing no one. Waking to kiss the tiny underside of her wrist, her fist wrapping the tip of my finger. Her mother's love is your love, and I'm not afraid anymore, for you have told me today I will be an angel of peace. And on to a basketball poem. This one, in light of national unrest, in light of George Floyd and his family, and what we're attempting to do as we approach our national propensity for ultimate violence. Inside basketball, there's something that develops. I don't know if it's naturally, but I think it's the notion that the best basketball is played with a lot of sharing and a lot of self-sacrifice on the behalf of others. So there's something that can become unifying in that. There's certainly, as you might imagine, a lot of teaching around aggression and competition and intensity. And sometimes because you're doing that, you foul a lot like I do. And that has done some damage to my fingers over the years. And so thankfully they don't hurt anymore, but those happened some many years ago with a few dislocations. But out of this comes these profound brotherhoods. And these have lasted my whole lifetime with men of various backgrounds, races, and work and vocations and families throughout the world. And so this connection is fascinating to me, how now we're all sort of cheering on each other's children and trying to give loving care to each other when someone's in someone's family is ill, or when somebody needs something. So something to be said, I think, about the unity or the direct intimacy of brotherhood that comes from giving, or in this case, a sport that calls us to give more, and in this case, a sport that calls us to be willing to sacrifice the ego towards something greater. And so this poem is kind of about that I was a point guard myself, and one of the pieces of basketball that's fascinating is an alley-oop. And so the alley-oop is when you're racing to the basket on a fast break, usually. And generally you want to move the defense away. So you do what's called a no-look pass. You're looking this way while your other wing is rushing to the rim to jump high in the air, and you're trying to throw the ball, the opposite way that you're looking. So it's all a lot of, ballet a little bit and chemistry. And then, people that have a high vertical, you can throw the ball really high and they jump over everybody and then they dunk it. So this poem is a little bit about that and the brotherhood that comes out of it. And it's called Godfire. And this will be my closing poem. Godfire. The way your hands moved through midair, reaching for round light leather, has always been to me not unlike the intimate fusion that connects the core of high magnitude stars. In this place where God shapes bones and ligament, fingers, thumb, and palm, we hated each other, brother, until basketball made me a point guard and you a swingman flyer who walked on wind. We had set our bodies to beat one another until our faces cracked like porcelain and blood rivers ran the cheekbone shelves of a South sunk in wine water. Because America meant us for violence, but better than we knew, God knew us. And now that the game is over, I can't unremember you, enfolding me as I hold you to my heart and you cup your hand to the back of my head. So thank you for the opportunity to be with you all today. And we'll leave with Emily Dickinson. I'm afraid to own a body. I'm afraid to own a soul. Not knowing when the dawn will come, I open every door.
Thank you, Shan. That was wonderful. A far-reaching contribution. And I've seen a lot of basketball in my time, and I don't think of it often as a self-sacrificing sport. So that was really profound to hear and think about. Our final reader is Angela Alaimo O'Donnell. Angela is someone I'm proud to consider a colleague and a poet friend who has made generous contributions to Barings Online. When I needed a poem set in Collegeville, which we were considering running in our annual report, I knew to ask Angela. And she sent me maybe 10 sonnets that she'd written while she was in residence for summer workshops. She seems to wake up with a sonnet every day, and not just any sonnet, but a perfectly crafted rhyme sonnet with an elegant turn or couplet. She may have partially gotten to that place while writing Andalusian Hours, a collection of 101 sonnets written in the voice of Flannery O'Connor, relating moments from O'Connor's biography in all their wit and poignancy. Angela's scholarship on Flannery O'Connor includes a biography, Flannery O'Connor, Fiction Fired by Faith, published by Liturgical Press, that was awarded first prize for excellence in publishing from the Association of Catholic Publishers. Her new critical book on Flannery O'Connor, Radical Ambivalence, Race in Flannery O'Connor, was published by Fordham University Press in 2020. She's one of the scholars featured in the recent American Master's program, Flannery, which is currently streaming on PBS, and which is a must-see. Angela is a professor, poet, and writer at Fordham University in New York City and serves as Associate Director of Fordham's Curran Center for American Catholic Studies. Her poetry publications include 2 chapbooks and 6 collections. She's published widely, and you can hear other things by her on YouTube. And she just is popping up more and more and more for me every time I look around. So including those 2 books, the book on race, and also which I had the pleasure of interviewing her about, and which has caused quite a stir in the larger world. And by being misquoted, misattributed, misused in a national publication in the New Yorker. And also just, Angela is both prolific and profound, which is a rare combination for poets. So welcome, Angela. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you for that very generous introduction, and thank you for your sympathy for my little book. that started the big article and the big conversation last summer. And thank you for inviting me to read with Shan and with Betsy. What a pleasure this is, and on the middle of a Wednesday afternoon, and to be able to hear their work and to be able to bring my work into conversation with theirs. I had ideas about what I was going to read, but now I've changed my mind now that I've listened to Betsy and Shan, because I would like to read some poems that kind of are part of their territory as well. So yes, I would like to read a few poems from this book, Andalusian Hours, which I appreciate the summary that you gave, Susan. It is 101 poems, 101 sonnets in the voice of Flannery O'Connor. Because I've spent so many years reading Flannery and teaching Flannery, she was in my head all the time. And I was trying to figure out, how do I get this voice out of my head? And I realized if I write poems that are in her voice, it's kind of a way of exercising her, externalizing it, so she's just not always in there, and have arguments with her, have conversation with her. So I wrote one sonnet thinking, well, this is interesting. Maybe I can, just get this out of my system. But then I wrote a second sonnet, and then I wrote a third sonnet. And before you know it, I had 101. So, and they all, they're sort of like an autobiography in verse. They begin with O'Connor's young life, and then they take her to her unfortunate end. At the age of 39, she died of the complications of lupus. I'm sure many of our readers are familiar with the life of Flannery O'Connor, but just as a quick reminder, she was born in 1925. She died in 1964. Many of her writings were being done at the height of the civil rights movement, very heady times, as she was living in the rural South. And she is, one of the greatest writers of the 20th century, American or otherwise, Catholic or otherwise, and has just this remarkable combination of brilliance, wit, a wicked sense of humor, and a very sharp tongue. So it was a lot of fun to get out of my own head, because poets spend a lot of time in their own heads, and be in Flannery's for a while and try to speak and think the way that Flannery does. So I'll read a few of these poems that try to get across some of that wit. She did, as I mentioned earlier, suffer from lupus, and was diagnosed at the age of 25, and that's what sent her back to rural Georgia to live with her mother. And she lived in exile there for the next 13 years of her life while she was doing her writing. And she often spoke about lupus and referred to it as the red wolf, as she does in this poem. This is the first poem of the book. It's called Flannery Rising. Waking early, I took the Georgia light as a sign from God of the wrecked world's end. The nimbus of sun bleached the barn white, hailed from the east like wandering saint, the bright one the abbot would most likely send out on a mission. That barn needed paint. The boards were rotting, the roof like to cave. It somehow escaped my mother's keen eye for spoil and squalor, all kinds of decay. Mine too. These soft bones dissolving inside my skin in a gunny sack race to be dust. The red wolf might lame me, but not my lust for this life, this world about to expire. I stand in the light. I welcome the fire. Because we've had a number of poems about chickens today, it's worth noting that Flannery, as a little girl growing up in Savannah, raised chickens. And she liked odd ones. She liked chickens that had mismatched eyes. She's forever was looking for a chicken that had two heads. So she was really fascinated by the oddness and weirdness and the freakiness of animals and of human beings as well. And this poem is based on a little story that Flannery tells in her essay, The King of the Birds. When she was 5 years old, she said, "When I was 5, I had an experience that marked me for life. Pathe News sent a photographer from New York to Savannah to take a picture of a chicken of mine who had the distinction of being able to walk either forward or backward." That's Flannery O'Connor from The King of the Birds. And here's the poem, Flannery's Fame. The cameraman came as a big surprise, as much of a surprise as how much I liked it. A star starting its easy rise against the flat Savannah sky. It was such a rush to have all those adult eyes trained on me and my trained bird. The hush of expectation assured me that I was different, the kind of child folks sought out, took moving pictures, and bragged about. I was going to be famous if I died trying. But the bird disdained the fame I hungered for. She would not walk the walk. I write stories now, but it's not the same as the day they flocked to gape and to gawk. Flannery's first brush with fame, and nothing ever compared with it after that. And you can find that Pathe Newsreel, by the way, of little 5-year-old Flannery on YouTube as she's trying to make her chicken walk backwards. A lot of these poems are about Flannery's another form of Flannery's oddness was growing up Catholic in the South. There were not very many Catholics in the South. And the odd sensibility from anybody's perspective, but particularly from the perspective of her Protestant neighbors of Catholics. So I think I'll read one or two of these poems. This one is called Flannery Considers Her Options. Each of these poems, by the way, begins with an epigraph from O'Connor's letters or her stories or her essays. And then this poem sort of takes off from the epigraph. And this one begins with a quotation from her story, A Temple of the Holy Ghost, in which the main character, who is obviously a version of Flannery, says, "She could never be a saint, but she thought she could be a martyr if they killed her quick." This is Flannery Considers Her Options. So many ways to go, it's hard to say. Cracked on the rack, hanged and beaten, boiled in oil, flayed and splayed, eaten by beasts starved for your skin. Anyway seems rough. It's persistence that counts, how long you can stand it, the pain being less than the terror. It amounts to grit and nerve, and if you're insane, it helps. When they set you on fire, pound in the nails, cut out your heart, you'll smile, though your prospects are dire. Praise your butcher plying his art. You can savor the taste of the trauma. Sit back and enjoy the drama. Some of these poems are also about Flannery's work. Her sense of what it was she was trying to do. We were speaking earlier before the webinar started about how to be a Catholic writer, how it is that you find your voice, and how it is that you bring together these twin vocations of being a Catholic and being an artist. And she struggled with this throughout her life, and obviously found a way to do it in a way that pleased her. So a lot of these spend time talking about Flannery's attitudes towards her own art. There's one here that particularly, I love the letter that this one comes from. Flannery got letters from people all over the world, and she wrote back to them. She had a lot of time on her hands, fortunately, and she enjoyed this kind of conversation with people since there was no internet or she didn't have a telephone. And so one of these conversations, in one of these conversations, Flannery talks about one of these letters. And she says, "Some old lady said that my book left a bad taste in her mouth. I wrote back to her and said, you weren't supposed to eat it." And this poem is called Flannery's Pottage. "I can't help but wondering what it tasted like. Burnt biscuits, buttermilk gone sour, potato salad that's turned in the sun. I suppose the tang of fact is bitter. It doesn't sit kindly on the tongue. But I know no other way to cook, to tell a story, or to write a book. Evil, sin, and just plain old mistake will salt my stew, no matter what I do to keep them out. They are the spice of life, savory and unsweet, flavor so true you can slice it thick with a butter knife. Chicken pot pie made with spoiled chicken. It seems my typewriter is my kitchen." Lest you think that all of these poems are light, funny, I've just realized I've chosen the funny ones to read. A large number of them are quite serious. And I think I'll read one or two of those. One of my favorite quotations by Flannery talking about being a writer and being a writer who believes in Christ is this one that comes from one of her letters, In the Habit of Being. She says, "If you believe in the divinity of Christ, you have to cherish the world at the same time that you struggle to endure it." This idea of the world, yes, it is broken and it is fallen, but it is also a world that we are compelled to love. And so this poem is Flannery's hard teaching, and it's about our world right now at this minute. "Not just love, but cherish it. This world, from the Latin caris to the French cher, meaning dear, meaning costly, beloved, meaning hold to your heart, handle with care. This world, from Old English, wereold, meaning human race, meaning age of man. This world, meaning our earth and her heirs, meaning all of us here, now, if you can. The serial killer, the crooked cop, the war-worn refugee at the door, the racist, the rapist, the shooter and shot, the filthy rich and the dirty poor. This world, ever ancient and ever new. Not just love it, but act like you do. This is a poem that I'll read, which comes from, the quotation comes from Flannery's prayer journal. And she was very frustrated when she was a student at Iowa because she was surrounded by people who did not really believe what she believed. And she was afraid that she was going to lose her faith. So she wrote this whole series of letters to God. And in one of the last letters, she says to God, "What I'm asking for is really very ridiculous. Oh Lord," I'm saying at present, "I am a cheese. Make me a mystic immediately." This is called Flannery's Prayer. Sometimes I tire of waiting for the transformation, the moment I move from milk product to holy hallelujah, halo on my head instead of rind, my smell suddenly sweet instead of sour, a rose growing amid the dairy farm of life. My mama and my proper Catholic aunts pray for rain, good weather. Won't they be surprised to learn what their odd daughter hankers for? Wisdom to light on me like a pet bird pecking its feed from my open hand. Vision that penetrates walls and doors that shut me up and away from your love. The stuff that cheeses like me dream of. Thank you.
Let me get pinned. Okay. Oh, thank you so much, Angela. And thank you, all three of you. It's wonderful to hear. You know, people wonder, as a poetry editor, what I'm looking for, and this is probably the highest of high bars, these three, but I hear all the qualities that I love so much in poetry, particularly the sensual nature of it, the actual lived life of it, the details, the voice, very strong voice. And so I just feel the need to say that, like, yeah, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I love. So thank you, all three of you, for being part of the Collegeville community and for joining us today. We do have a little bit of time. And the main question that we received was, how do you know when you need to write a poem about something? What causes something to move from experience into poem? And that's for everyone. So we could go in order, starting with Betsy.
That's a great question. And it's funny because my kids, they would know, something would happen and they would turn to me and they're like, "You're going to write a poem about this, aren't you?" And so I can't pinpoint, but it was just when something happened, and it could be like a pop can rolling down a highway. It could be when I accidentally hit a raccoon with the car, whatever. So they just kind of knew Mom needs to write about this, and I'll have to think about what it is exactly that they were cueing into, but it's a great question. Mostly I think when the bigger than or the ununderstandable comes to bear, and I just need to meet it with words. So that's what I would say.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my house, it's and I think it's probably from my mom and my grandma, but we have just a house of music. My wife is a vocal performer and did that in college, but also still performs professionally. And then all three girls are singers, dancers. And so there's all this music in the house all the time. And I think that there's sort of a practice. I was talking before we got on about this room right here is put together by my youngest daughter. She loves painting. So we have this shared studio that we took over from her sister's room when her sister went to college last year. So in any case, people sort of work on their art in the house a lot in this house. And mostly for me, it's late at night, 10 o'clock at night to about 1 a.m. And just because I didn't want personally in my own life to be away from the girls or Jennifer for the art. So I decided to sort of put these hours up there, 30 years ago. So it doesn't mean every night I'm doing that. It's more like a space of peace or a space of a place where it can be engaged. And when I'm on a project, that is pretty consistent. But so I sort of know, okay, this or that, and it might be something like what Betsy talked about happened, and I might take a note of that, or maybe just getting to the chair, and usually again there's music involved, and then just staying there consistently. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with both of my colleagues here. It has to do with being grabbed a hold of by something and not being able to resist it, really. You feel this something bubbling up in you, and that it's something that you need to deal with in language. Since that's our art, maybe we have other arts that we use, but obviously language is one of them. How do I address this thing that has happened to me, or that I've witnessed, and try to interrogate it, try to understand exactly what it is that's happened, and why am I so disturbed by it, disturbed in a good way or in a bad way. I forgot as I was reading, one of the poems that I was going to read was one of the poems a poem that Flannery, I write because of Flannery's attitudes, not her famous refusal to meet James Baldwin in Georgia. And a lot of people get very upset over that because they think, well, this is obviously a sign that she's a racist, when in reality, one of the things O'Connor is trying to do is protect her family, herself, and Baldwin, because you don't have, at the time when she's living, African Americans come to your house without there being serious consequences. This is Ku Klux Klan country. And so one of the poems deals with Flannery and James Baldwin, but I was very much aware as I was writing that poem that I was also writing about Ahmaud Arbery. I was also writing, George Floyd had not been killed yet when I wrote that poem, but I was thinking about contemporary situations in which disasters have happened as a result of, as a result of a lot of things, but obviously this racial division that we have, and our inability as Americans and human beings to seem to be able to deal with it. So I think sometimes you kind of find an alternate way to offload things that are bothering you. You might not write directly about it, but then you find another way to get at it. And another thing I think that's interesting, I'm sorry, I've been talking with my students about this because they're all working on sonnet sequences right now. There's nothing that you can't write about. The other day, I have a great set of Cuisinart knives that my son gave me for Christmas. I have been so careful with those knives, but lately I've gotten comfortable with them. And the result is not one, but two of my fingers really, really cut really deeply. It was one of those moments like, okay, is this emergency room or is it not? And I knew as soon as that happened, because I cut myself. I used this hand to cut that hand. And I was just like horrified at what my right hand did to me. And I knew, all right, I have to deal with this. I'm going to have to write about this in some way. So it's just these things that crop up in everyday life, all of them deserve our attention. It's a matter of deciding what not to write about in some ways.
Thank you. Okay, well, we're at the end of our time pretty much. So again, I want to thank the poets and also thank everybody who has joined us online. We invite you to join us for future events. Please watch for event information and registration details on our website for upcoming Collegeville Connection presentations. Next Wednesday, April 28th, same time, noon to 1 Central Time, You'll have the opportunity to hear from St. John's University alum and former Collegeville Institute resident scholar, Eric Lecomte, who, as executive director of Jubilee USA Network, has led religious groups to win policies that alleviate poverty, address global conflict, and promote human rights. Next week, Executive Director Don Ottenhoff will be in conversation with Eric about how the biblical theme of Jubilee can apply to pandemic response worldwide. And just on a personal note, to hear that is what we're going to be doing next week. These Collegeville Connection events really do highlight the range of scholarship and artistic endeavor that goes on at the Collegeville Institute. And we're really delighted that we've found this platform for sharing that diversity and range. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.